Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure everyone's already probably had lunch. We're kind of feeling the afternoon slump here, so we'll try and keep this fun. I know everyone's probably really, really excited to talk about revenue cycle management. I know that we are. This is a session that we've done a couple of times with different ABA groups. It will be a little bit different than some of the other speaking sessions today in that we're not doing like a panel. Our goal is really not to talk at you for an hour. We also have a relatively small group today, so our hope is to make it as interactive as we can and really tailor it to the various challenges in RCM and billing that you all might be facing. So we'll please encourage questions. We'll do some interactive portions. If you have a question, just raise your hands, and we'd love to kind of address it as we go along and make it much more of a discussion rather than holding all questions for the end. But without further ado, I'm extremely excited to introduce Becky Carlson, who will be leading the session today. Becky, I'll let her introduce herself more fully, but Becky has a really phenomenal background in RCM for well over a decade now. She started on the payer side, so she really understands how folks think about things on that side, and then she's also spent a while on the provider side in behavioral health at various high-growth national organizations in both mental health and in ABA, so she's a wealth of knowledge. And I will pass it on over to her. And if everyone who's standing, if you don't mind just getting seated, we'd very much appreciate it. Awesome.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. So, title of our session for today is Billing Blind Spots That Are Costing You Time, Cash, and Sanity. I think the last one is probably the most important. Many folks who are not in RCM often learn anything about billing against their will. So let's talk about how you can get ahead of that. So as Eliana shared, I'm Becky Carlson. I'm our head of revenue cycle at Joyful Health. I have worked on the payer side, I've worked on the provider side, I've worked on the vendor side. Pretty much if it can go on a claim, I've built it in some capacity. Oh, sorry. All right, so first, who is Joyful Health? This will be quick. The goal is not to be a sales pitch. So our mission is to simplify healthcare payment operations by bringing the joy back to running a practice. What is more joyful than getting paid for the services that you provide? So you've earned it. Let's make sure you get paid for it. What that looks like is we offer revenue recovery services. We take on the work for denied and rejected claims and anything over 60 days aged in AR. So those awful, stuck, painful claims that you just can't get paid, we take them happily, and we'd be glad to chat with anyone that wants to do that. So, continuing on, goal of this session, as Eliana shared, this is going to be a bit of a working session. You guys will see there is a worksheet on your seat. The goal is to guide you through how we identify the issues that are existing in billing for your ABA practice. It's a little bit guided. There's some prompts there. We'll be going through it together. Ground rules, I ask that you don't name your organization or payers publicly if you're speaking or asking a question. We want you to share patterns, not war stories. I know a lot of RCM pain is often very, very painful. And then you can participate silently. So you don't have to speak up. You don't have to engage if you don't want to. But please, the worksheet's there to support you. So, what is a blind spot? I'm sure a lot of folks have different opinions. If you drive vehicles, it might be a place that you can't see something. But in terms of definition for what we're doing today, a blind spot is going to be a non-obvious problem that's happening. Oftentimes you find out about it way after the fact. Oftentimes folks will normalize it as, oh, it's ABA billing. There's nothing more frustrating than someone saying, oh, well, you work in ABA, so it's expected that your billing performs lower or your metrics aren't as high. That's garbage, and we're going to talk about how to fix that. And then things that become expensive over time. It may not be a big problem at the beginning, but as it continues to grow, it costs you more and more money, time, sanity. So we're going to dive into doing some work. And this is where your first activity is going to begin. So on your worksheet, you'll see this question. What is one ABA billing issue that you feel like you fixed, but it just keeps coming back? So I'm going to give you guys a minute to think about what's happening at your practice, what's one of these issues that just keeps lingering for you, and go ahead and write that down, think about it, whatever you're comfortable with. Thank you. Do you guys have it? Did it feel like maybe that was like top of mind? You could write it down immediately and name it? Feeling pretty good there? Well, if you guys are near some folks, I'd love to have you turn to someone in proximity to you and kind of talk about what the issue is. Again, not naming anything confidential to your business, but share a little bit about what is happening. Why does that issue exist? So I'll give you a few minutes to talk with the folks around you of what's happening and why it's an issue. I'm hearing some conversations happening. Did anybody else hear some issues that are maybe closely related to what they're navigating at their own practice? If you're not sitting with people from your practice? Awesome. So, gonna require a little crowd participation here. Do any of these feel like you? So if you think about the issue that you're focusing on, how many folks here feel like it's related to authorization? Go ahead and raise your hand if your issue is authorization focused. No, everybody's authorizations are pristine. They have no issues with authorization. This crowd's a unicorn crowd. I'm impressed. Alrighty. What about CPT code units? Anyone feeling the pain from documenting their CPT code units? If you want to raise your hand, if that's you. We've got someone in the back. Thank you for being brave. Anybody else? How about place of service? Where did the service happen and where did the insurance think it happened? Anyone here struggling with that? We've got another brave soul up front. We've got some more folks over there, some friends in the back. Place of service is a pain in the butt. How about documentation? Anyone? Yeah, documentation hurts because when we're admins, it often means we don't have control over documentation. How do we talk to providers about what they're putting and how it impacts their billing? All right, and what about systems? Anyone feel like their system's working against them? Yeah, that one always hurts. You spend the money to have a system to support your practice, and unfortunately, it's just not getting you there. Anyone have anything else? Anyone they want to share that feels like an issue that they're navigating that others may? Got a hand raised over there? You got something else? No? Yeah. Oh. Wow, that is a very specific issue. I appreciate you raising that. Thank you for sharing. Definitely impacts things like documentation, billable time, units, kind of hits a whole bunch of those. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have anything outside of these categories or maybe a mix of these categories that they want to share?
One thing that's not on here, but I would assume a lot of hands will get raised up, but a payer or payers that are just being particularly difficult and you can't really figure out why, and a whole bunch of your claims are getting held up and things are aging out and we can't get them paid.
Oh, yeah.
Hands. I saw some people nodding. I'm assuming that's a lot of us. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So clearly, there's a lot that can impact ABA billing, and there's a lot of people who are also experiencing issues similar to yours. One of the hardest parts of this is feeling like you're looking at this in a vacuum with your business. But the good news, you're not alone in how much this sucks sometimes. So, what are we going to do about it? And how do we get to the bottom of it? And how do we get to a place where it becomes a fixable problem? So for our friends that don't exist, because nobody raised their hand for prior authorization, let's talk about some questions you can ask yourself to start to get to the root of why this is an issue. So I apologize, y'all are going to have to bear with me because everyone's prior authorizations are perfect. But some of the questions you can ask are authorizations obtained prior to service? They are called prior authorization for a reason. We work with quite a few practices that have come to us and said, oh, we didn't need that. We tried to get it after the fact. You need it, almost always, unless you have a special agreement. So keeping in mind that you want to have that in place before services. Do they cover all of the units, all of the dates, the appropriate provider, and the specific CPT codes that you will be using? The amount of practices we have worked with who have obtained authorization that does not match the service they provide is so frustrating because we know you guys are trying your best out there, and we want to make sure that you're getting the authorization that covers the service you're providing. Are reauthorization timelines being captured? Bad news, authorizations do not last forever. We would love if they did. It would make things so much easier. Are you capturing those reauthorization timelines and making it so your team can get ahead of that authorization aging out? We had a practice who missed the reauthorization window by 2 days. They lost hundreds of dollars because of 2 days. That feels so silly. And then are there other factors that look like authorization issues that are impacting your claims? This is going to include things like provider enrollment, network status, and the billing provider type. This is super important in ABA. These are things that will return on claims as denials for authorization. They're not. You may have a beautiful authorization in place that covers all of the services, but if you're not in network or you're billing with a different provider than was listed on the authorization, you're going to run into that denial, and it's going to trick you in the wrong direction. I'm going to pause there because, again, I know everyone's prior auths are perfect, but does anyone have any questions or kind of does this resonate with folks in terms of what you're navigating? Cool. All right. So we had some folks that I think will actually find this part useful. So CPT code units, some questions to ask yourself in navigating this is how long was the provider with the patient? This very much touches on how long was time physically spent, was the child awake when they received those services, all incredibly important things that impact the number of units that are billable. Other questions are, where did the provider see the patient? This will be discussed much more when we talk about place of service, but the number of units billed at a specific place of service is important. What are the payer rules for units? So are there any kind of limitation on the number of units for a specific period of time? Are there any kind of limitations globally? So if they're seeing multiple providers, so keeping those things in mind. And then is the patient seeing another provider that could be counting towards this limit if it exists? And so it's really tough if the patient is seeing someone outside of your practice, but getting a good understanding of who else they're engaging with could be impactful to what you're seeing. Any questions on that piece?
There is one right over there.
Go ahead.
The question was, just in case everybody didn't hear it, I know we're not passing around microphones, is how do you find the information of what units are allowed per payer per day? Was that the question? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. If you see a child on Sunday for maybe 4 hours and you see a child during the week for 2 hours, is there any place that you could check up what would be the maximum amount per day?
Yeah, this is tough. So a lot of folks often learn this from denials, which is the most painful way to learn this. We don't want you to lose money in order to learn how this works. There's a few payers that will release guides specifically for ABA. Make sure you double check to see the version that you're looking at, because they often update them. But even just a simple Google search of the payer that you're talking about, an ABA guide, can get you very far in terms of the payer-specific rules. Another piece as well is engaging with provider services. I imagine a lot of folks just rolled their eyes. That's an awful experience trying to call a payer. But that's another great way as well of they're required to provide information around the policy, and they should be able to share with you limitations that exist by day. It is often payer specific, so it sucks because you're going to have 15 different rules if you have 15 different payers, but it often comes in handy to make sure that you're able to get ahead of that before it becomes a problem. Thank you for your question.
Is there a maximum, across the board?
I wish. I don't know. I mean, job security says for me, thankfully, no, but for you, not so much. It would be really great if there was standardization, but unfortunately, there's not.
And even worse, payer guidelines are notorious for changing frequently as well, with effectively no notice. So our team spends a lot of time keeping up with payer manuals, checking them when they're refreshing, and keeping track of them, at least for your major payers. Like Becky said, many of them will release behavioral health specific guides. So if you kind of keep track of where that is, even setting a reminder for yourself to go back and continue looking at it, it's honestly the best that they can offer right now. Otherwise, it's more likely that it'll get caught at a denial, and then our team spends a lot of time on the phone with the payer and payer reps trying to get more updated documentation from them.
Thank you. Yeah, so it depends specifically on the CPT code. And for folks that didn't hear that question, the question was what other providers would count towards the limit? And so it's going to be incredibly important based on the type of service. But you'll see some folks will engage with folks in the school system. And so they'll be receiving services at school as well as with a specialized provider. That's often where we see the largest conflict is between the school professionals as well as the ABA professional. Some schools, depending on the school, will offer services that can be billable into insurance, and they will bill to insurance in some cases. So that's where we see overlap of instances where. No. I would have to look specifically at the CPT code you're using. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Come find us afterward. Any other questions? Honestly, this is a place where we see a lot of denials, especially because, we should have said this at the beginning, but I think payers themselves are still coming around to the notion of ABA billing, and oftentimes when we call, we actually get very conflicting information depending on the rep that you're talking to. I don't know if this is something that you all have run into as well, but I think the more information that you all have on how this works, why things may get denied, the better that you can advocate for yourselves to the payer, since calling them and asking them a pretty broad question oftentimes won't even yield the answer that you're looking for. So happy to, please keep raising hands, happy to keep answering questions as we go.
Awesome. So continuing on for place of service, so some great questions that you can ask while navigating a place of service issue are, where did the provider see the patient? Was it at home? Was it in the office? Was it in the school? Was it in the park? I know it doesn't happen often in the park, but where did care actually take place? And then where else did they receive services on the same day? We have a lot of customers who oftentimes will provide services in office and via telehealth in the same day, or services via telehealth and in the home. And so being mindful of the different places of service that occur across the treatment spectrum in the ABA space, And then, does the documentation support the place of service? Does anyone here feel like their providers are doing well at making sure it's clear where the service happened? No? Yeah?
I just have a question on that.
Yeah, of course.
Do you have to get pre-authorization on the places where the service is going to take place?
So the question was, do you need to get prior authorization on the place of service? That is going to depend on the payer. Some of them will want different prior authorization for different place of service because the cost changes. But unfortunately, I feel like I should stamp depending on the payer on my forehead because that's kind of the mantra, unfortunately.
One big issue we've been seeing recently across our customers in ABA with denials is a lot of denials for services that happened in different locations that took place on the same day. How do you bill that? Does it go on one claim, on multiple claims? What's the place of service that you put? How many units do you put? I don't know if anyone's seeing that, but that can be like a pretty tricky scenario that also ends up being pretty payer dependent on how they want those claims to be submitted. So another like ABA kind of specific quirk we've been seeing lately.
Yeah, we had one payer last week who told us any services built outside of the office needed to be billed with the community place of service. We were all flabbergasted. So stay tuned. We'll let you know if they pay, but keeping those types of things in mind.
And one thing that's also challenging about these is that if you resubmit them or continue to submit them a certain way, it's often that they will just continue to get denied because payers have their rules engine set in a very specific manner that oftentimes they don't even exactly know how it operates. So just continuing to submit it that way or even appealing it doesn't always work. So something that we've done frequently is trying to get in touch with the provider rep or whoever you worked with during the credentialing process to see if you can get a lot of these like batch reprocessed because oftentimes they will just continue to get denied and those claims will pile up. Yes.
Yes, so we have seen that. For the folks that did not hear the question, it was if you give home care services, can you give ABA services in the same day? The answer is yes, but we do recommend checking with the payer to understand their specific policy around things like place of service, CPT code units, bundling, service lines, all that fun. Yes? Yes, and that's the piece where we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation talking about engaging with different vendors that can help kind of alleviate that situation. It's also something that when we work with a new payer where we don't have a representative that we work with, we actually run a process where we will take one claim and we will call the same payer 5 times and try to get 5 answers and see which of them are consistent. It is funny how fast things move in an escalation process when you go to a manager of provider services and show them 5 different answers to a question.
It's really frustrating. Another thing that we've done is like sending a test claim. So depending on the different answer that you get, rather than going and sending all, like I think a lot of folks will be like, oh, okay, the payer said this one thing, I will now make that change, and then every claim I'm going to send from here on out is going to have that change. That can be tricky. We see a lot of revenue loss happen that way. So sending a couple of claims with that particular policy, seeing if that pays out, is often a lot less risky. Also phoning a friend, that's all, it's what we do across our customers. So we have a lot of ABA customers across the country. We will fight very, very hard, hopefully one time, get an answer for that payer, and then apply that across the board. So it's partially why we were trying to get some of you to talk to each other. I think there's a lot of power in community. Like, this is unfortunately a situation where the information is really opaque. It's not clear. So the more that you can kind of ask other folks and see if this worked for them, it's unfortunately sometimes the only way to do it, but a lot of escalation and just like persistence.
I think you had a question.
What's the best way to communicate things like place of service or who the BCBA is as a billing company? Because sometimes the issue we face is that sometimes some of the data is missing from our billing export, or sometimes I guess related to this screen, sometimes the BCBA will be out for whatever reason. They're like the patient's kind of jumping from BCBA to BCBA. What's the best way, in your opinion, to have the billing company and the service providing company be on the same page with all these issues that get in the way of billing?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I'm going to summarize it for the folks if they didn't hear. So what's the best way to ensure the information of what happened at the service is being consistently shared with your billing company? And it's a tough question. The reason it's a tough question is it starts where my brain goes to while we start to problem solve that puzzle is, what is your communication pathway with that billing service? Do you have an integration, or is it word of mouth? What did your onboarding process look like? What did you define in terms of communication pathways for new information and exception criteria to the normal communication pathways? We will dive into that, I promise. But an excellent question and the right one to be asking.
They should be able to self-serve that information, really. Like we're not a full service billing company. We really only work denials, but we still need all of that information to be able to work it. So that is, like, we do ask all of that up front, and then there are ways for our team to go and find that. It's often that we have to look in the EHR. So if it's not in the billing system or in the clearinghouse, because if that's all we have access to, all we'll see are the claims that were submitted. For ABA specifically, we do spend a lot of time in the EHR because we need to see the session note, we need to see what was on the schedule, we need to see how things were submitted, we need to see where the authorization is. So I'd probably start there, to Becky's point, like, how did you onboard them? But they should be able to self-serve. There are very few things that we have to escalate back to our customers in order to get them to answer us. They should be able to get that information on their own if it's well documented and in an accessible place for them.
Awesome. Amazing. All right, documentation. So a couple of questions from a documentation perspective that are worth asking as you're kind of diving into the root of the issue. Does the provider documentation support both clinical compliance and billing? We love our providers. They work so hard. They provide wonderful care. Oftentimes, the focus from a documentation perspective is going to be on the clinical compliance, as it should be, but we don't want to forget about the support from a billing perspective. What information are we learning from our claims process that could potentially help providers improve their documentation? Always framed as from a billing perspective, but the ideal state is that the documentation is both clinically compliant and make sure that that provider gets paid. So is that feedback loop happening? Does your clinical team receive feedback on upheld denials? So in instances where documentation is the issue, they request documentation, your billing team submits it, and it's upheld. Is that information shared back with the provider so that they can be aware of where their note was successful or not successful and what changes potentially need to be made? And then, does your documentation support billing provider and rendering provider relationship? ABA is one of the unique spaces where oftentimes when you're working with non-NPI providers who are providing that care, it needs to, tongue-tied. We need to ensure that the documentation supports both the rendering provider and the provider that you're using to bill under. Any questions on documentation? Okay. And then the last piece we're going to really dig into is going to be on the systems. So important questions to ask. I think this gentleman in the front was already starting to ask these types of questions. But do your systems, your EHR system, your billing system, your accounting system, do they talk to each other? Or do they rely on a human being to kind of communicate between them? Does your system improve a provider process, or is it an obstacle to them? The amount of folks that we talk to where they're like, well, we have this bespoke process that we do in Google Sheets because it doesn't happen in X system. You pay for that system. Why are you living in Google Sheets in order to use it appropriately? And then the last piece is, does your system support your business growth plans? The systems that you start your business with may not be the systems that you scale your business with. And are you setting yourself up for success by making the appropriate system transitions for your business growth, or are you being held back by a system that you're unwilling to change? And those are tough questions. They're not easy. Changing systems is a pain in the butt. Nobody likes to change anything. But keeping those questions in mind while you're navigating that is incredibly important. And you want to be doing this frequently, especially for anyone that hung out from the last panel about growing your business to 50 states. If you're growing, you need to be making sure that your systems are too. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So More questions to ask that are tough. We don't love these questions, but are metrics the thing that is pointing you to this issue, or is it a feeling? A vibe is a metric. Oftentimes there's a number somewhere that is telling you something is wrong, even if you haven't seen it immediately. But we want to make business decisions based off of metrics. So keeping that in mind, having the information to inform the decisions or changes that you're looking to make. Where are you spending the most human effort, and is it making an impact? Anyone's billing team working overtime at the appeals factory and feel like they're not getting anywhere? Yeah, I saw a couple head nods. Yeah, we want to make sure if our team is spending time on something, it's actually moving the needle forward and getting things done. So having that difficult question of what are they doing, and is it actually making the impact we want it to? And then what would your business, finances, team, sanity look like if this was no longer an issue? What does that free you up to do? What does that allow you to focus on? What does that allow your team to focus on? How long has this issue been known and unmanaged? Anyone have that problem that they just keep sweeping under the rug because it feels a little too painful to deal with it today, and you'll get to it eventually, and eventually ends up being like 3 years later? Yeah, we don't want to let things linger. We want to try to address them. And then lastly, who needs to be involved in getting to the bottom of this issue? There is nothing more frustrating than when someone makes a decision about something you do in a vacuum and then suddenly your whole world pivots. We want to make sure that we have the right folks involved in getting to the bottom of it. So if we're talking about documentation changes, do we have a representative for the clinical team that's there to support the conversation? If we're talking about systems changes, do we have a member who is familiar with the systems that we're using and why we're using them that's able to kind of talk through what that transition looks like? So while we want you to tackle problems and we want you to do so with urgency, we don't want you to do it alone. And make sure that you have the right folks in the room to be able to appropriately make that decision and not just let it be a knee-jerk reaction. Awesome. We still have 24 minutes. Any questions on any of that before we start chatting through RCM strategy? No? Okay. So how do you figure out your RCM strategy? And this could be you're starting anew and you want to figure out how you're eventually going to bill. This could be you don't love what your current strategy is and you would like to pivot to make it a little bit better. So we're going to start with the question that if any Jurassic Park fans are here, you don't want to ask, can we do this? You want to ask, should we do this? So should we be spending the time to do billing in-house? Should we be spending the time to manually check eligibility? Should we be working all of our denials in AR by ourselves? And so should we be doing this ourselves? And in doing that, it's where should we focus our internal resources? Where do we need specialized expertise? And how do we create the optimal mix of delivery models? There is no longer just the insourced or outsourced model. There's often a beautiful spectrum of hybrids now where you can own different aspects of your RCM, you can hand off other pieces, you can control what you want to and not do what you don't want to do. So keeping those things in mind and thinking about RCM in the individual functions that it supports. What is your front-end RCM? These are going to be activities like scheduling, checking eligibility, obtaining those super important that everybody's doing a great job at prior authorizations. You're going to have mid-cycle activities, so these are going to be the coding pieces. These are going to be the claims submission aspects and making sure things are getting out the door. And then you have end-cycle activities, and this is going to be your working your denials, working your AR, collecting your patient invoices, all of those things. Okay. So we're going to move through this a little bit quickly, but for each function, we're going to ask the questions of what's performing well today. What specific challenges are we experiencing, which is what we did through each of those blind point slides. What resources, so staff, expertise, and technology, do we currently have? And what would improvement in this area mean for our organization? When we're evaluating each function, we want to rate them on a 1 to 5 scale, which feels really rudimentary, but you would be surprised at how easy it is to start to identify issues when you do it this way. And so finally, we're going to look at the right approach for each function within RCM. So you're going to keep it in-house if you have high strategic value. You can develop the necessary expertise. The cost structure is favorable, and direct control is essential for patient experience or compliance. We recommend outsourcing if there's not a core competency, if it's not a core competency that differentiates you in the space, you lack the necessary expertise. External providers offer cost or quality advantages, and oversight can be maintained through effective governance.
And one thing I want to mention is that even if you do choose to keep something in-house, there is so much more technology, honestly, than there ever has been that should really speed up your team. So one thing to think about, of course, like, does it integrate with my systems? How would it work? But even if you do choose to keep eligibility in-house, for example, there are so many different eligibility vendors out there that could at least make your team much more effective than they were previously. So I think that's why these questions are a lot more important now more than ever. There are so many of these different AI vendors that are doing different things to kind of various levels of success. I think some of them will just take over the entire workflow for you and manage it internally. Others might give you tech to make your team more efficient. So hopefully this framework helps a little bit. We'll have a QR code at the end where if you'd like for us to send you the slides, we can do so. I know that we were moving through them quickly. Some folks are taking pictures, so we're happy to share these out. And then we also have a guide that we made of every RCM function. So everything from the front end to mid-cycle to back end, kind of broken up into individual jobs. So you can use that as you kind of think about your strategy of where do I need technology, what do I want to keep in-house, and what are some of the areas that might not be working as well as they could be.
Awesome. And one message I love to always leave, we do a lot of different workshops and things, is that these things are hard because they are hard. Like, if you feel like billing is hard, it's because it actually is. It's not that you're not capable. It's not that you're not smart in this area. It's that it's intentionally difficult. And so that's something we always like to leave folks with. But as Eliana shared, and I believe it'll be up there, so we do have a few QR codes here. So if you need some help with AR and denials, we are happy to do so. We also, again, do quite a few workshops. So if you'd like to be included in future workshops or share when we're having them, we'd be happy to discuss that as well.
That second QR code, the one on the right, would be for if you want slides sent. If you fill that out, we'll make sure to email everybody with the slides with all the resources and things that we mentioned. Feel free to email us. We also have a booth, so we're around. We're sponsoring coffee, so go get free coffee so that we can all refuel and re-energize. And come find us. We'll be here today. We'll be here tomorrow, and would love to help out however we can if you have any more niche-specific questions that we didn't get to today.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
y'all.
Appreciate it.